Oh, welcome to breakout session 4 of the day. We're joined here in this session by Eduardo, James and Victor, who are teaching English at the British Council in Hong Kong. They specialise in teaching early years, primary, secondary and adult learners, and together they've set up an equality, diversity and inclusion special interest group. Now, one of the aims of that group is to highlight the requirement to design materials and implement ideas that take into account learners' individual differences and can therefore be used and can be relatable to a vast amount of people. Now, today, they're going to be providing an overview of the project, give us some information about how they did it, and provide some insights on how that's going. I will just mention that if anybody has any questions, there will be some time at the end of the session to go over those. But please do use the Q&A function within the room. So what I'll do is I'm going to pass over to the three of you. So.
All right, thank you. Let me move this over here. We'll be moving the camera like that. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everyone who's joining us for this session. It's titled Embedding Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion in Early Years, Primary and Secondary General English Classes. My name is Eduardo. Hi, everyone. So as Luke mentioned, today we're going to Sorry there. So today we're going to give you a brief introduction of the project, the inception of the project, how the project links to our organizational values. We're going to talk about how we adapted and created materials to embed EDI content into our lessons. And talk about also a little bit about how we communicated the project to our stakeholders, so that is the students, the parents, also our colleagues and management. And at the end, we're briefly going to mention our vision for the future of the project. Now, lots of factors have contributed to the establishment of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Special Interest Group, or SIG, as we call it internally in the British Council. So those range from the personal, be it experiences inside or outside the classroom, to lots of other factors, changes in culture and society. So, for example, the increasing conversation about inequality around the world. So, of course, we know terrible news we get every day from different places and legislations that are trying to limit rights of people. There was a huge, as we all know, a huge drive to have proper conversations in different types of organizations about race, ethnicity, and culture, starting like 2 years ago as a consequence of the murder of George Floyd. Certainly it happened at the British Council. Of course, this also answers to the ever-rising representation of different groups of people in the media. So it's actually kind of like a disparity, right? Like on one hand, you have people making legislation to stop certain groups, but on the other hand, representation is at an all-time high in different types of media. And also, of course, in our context, the need to expose our learners to the diversity of the human experience. Now, personally, the true start, so all of this contributes, right? But I have to highlight that the true start of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Special Interest Group comes from a personal experience that I had in the classroom. So just to give you an idea, to keep it short. So while this is probably 2.5 years ago, 2019, yeah, 3 years ago, I was teaching a K1 class. So K1s here in Hong Kong, just for you to know, those are 3-year-olds. So I specialize in teaching early years. So I had this student that would not stop crying. He would just cry nonstop for the whole lesson. So now this is not uncommon for this age group. Maybe some of you know, especially at the beginning of the academic year. But usually in my experience, this stops after, I don't know, a month. But in the case of these students, it wouldn't stop. I tried different types of methods. I talked to my management, to the parents, nothing would seem to work. He was just afraid of me. And I couldn't understand why. So after a while, I asked my TA and my teaching assistant to just, whom the student liked, to just approach the child again, because we tried several times. But now that a bond was established between the two of them, to approach the child again and ask the child, what's wrong? What's happening? Why are you afraid of Mr. Ed? And that's how they call me, they know me. And in Cantonese, of course, all of this happened in Cantonese. The student was very honest and told my assistant that he was afraid of me because of the color of my skin, because I was darker. So I have to be honest, the assistant was very reluctant to share this with me at the moment, understandably so. But when finally she did it, I have to be honest, my first reaction was shock and kind of, like, okay, well, that's all right then, you keep crying. But then after that wore off, I stopped to think about, wait a minute, this child is just 3 years old. How and why is he forming these opinions or repeating these types of opinions already? So I looked at this as an opportunity to maybe, if the child is not being exposed, or like awareness is not being raised of the diversity of the world outside, maybe at least I can do something in my classroom, okay, for this. So what I did was I looked at ways, I researched ways in which I could embed equality, diversity, and inclusion aspects into my lessons. So like I told you before, this was at the beginning of the academic year. So that first term was all about, they're 3 years old, the world revolves around them. So it's describing themselves and their families. So I thought, okay, perfect opportunity. I can show, instead of the typical, like the same books that we have there about families, I can show a picture of my family, a diverse family, or stories with other diverse families. And then I can ask them questions about what they think, So I started step by step because they're young learners, very young learners. The best way to start with them I found was with stories, so storybooks. So that was my initial approach. I thought, okay, I can conduct some research and expand our early years library and include EDI books. So at first I focused on race, ethnicity, and culture, but then I started to look into EDI, or approach to EDI as an organization. And I found that, okay, I can expand. I can actually try to raise awareness, not just about this, but other areas. So here, so that's a little bit like an introduction about our global and local context. I'll talk briefly about the organization. So I was lucky enough to be in a moment there where lots of changes were happening with equality, diversity, and inclusion, and I was guaranteed a safe space where, as you see here, our organization, our mandates take EDI issues very seriously. So I was provided a framework, a safe space that would guarantee that, I could conduct this work properly. right? So if you see here, we have some priority areas, priority grounds around EDI. So this is, as you see, race, ethnicity, and culture was one of them, like the first one that I tackled. And then we have things like gender, disability, age, sexual orientation, religion and belief, others that permeate the different areas. So it's not just one thing, like for example, socioeconomic background that also links to the other areas there. So knowing that the organization had resources and was working on this certainly made me feel like I was on the right track with my work. I have to highlight that this, so it started to expand, but it has always like the origins, like grassroots origins from teachers. It was not, despite the fact that the organization was doing all of this and it has policies and vision and statements, this came from the teachers. So as the project started growing, more people became interested. So before we give you more details about the actual project and the materials design aspect of it, I want to just show you our institutional mandate, our EDI strategy, or what we call the vision statement. So in the British Council, we want everyone who comes into contact with us to feel valued and respected. And also we want our programs, our services, and general ways of working to demonstrate our stated commitment to EDI. And we feel like the project in which we are involved is the perfect example of this, encapsulates all of this. So now I'm going to hand it over to Victor, who's going to talk a little bit more about our mission. So let me move the computer here. Okay, there we go.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this session. And thank you to Trinity College London and to Regent's University London for having us. So for those of you who want to set up a working group or a special interest group focused on equality, diversity, and inclusion, we want to share some of the thinking process behind everything we've done so far. So as Eduardo said, we've been working on this for about 2 years now, and 2.5 years. And there's been quite a bit of planning behind everything. It hasn't been only about creating materials. It's also been about fostering a culture that promotes equality, diversity, and inclusion in our classrooms and outside of the classroom, also in the staff room and the teaching center, the school in general. So before showing you anything specific about our mission and our vision and what we've done, what we've set out to achieve, I want to say that it's really, really important to have a clearly defined path, to have clear goals to achieve and to keep them, realistic, achievable. Before we decided to have a strategy for our center, and before we started dreaming of having an impact on other centers throughout the network of the British Council, we wanted to just create materials for our classes. And we started, as James is going to tell you later, we started with our primary classes, but eventually we decided to expand the project and to focus on other product areas, other life stages, and to communicate our efforts to other parts of our school, other parts of our organization, because we need to sort of find a way of getting buy-in from everybody in the school, from everybody in the company, depending on your context. We also believe that it's important that your working group, as our special interest group does, for your initiative to align with a broader organization-wide values and initiatives. as Eduardo said, we're very lucky to be in a context that enables us to talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. But if you are not, if there's no conversation around equality, diversity, and inclusion in your school, then here's the invitation for you to be the main actor, for you to affect change, and for you to get your managers, your director of studies, and your peers and the parents in your school to take action and to embed the values of equality, diversity, and inclusion in everything that you do in class. So this is one of the aims of this presentation, which is want to show that this is possible from a grassroots level, and that we don't need to wait for a top-down directive to get things started and to effect change. So I'm going to show you, we're going to show you a bit of our specific special interest group vision and mission statement. We want to share some of our strategic planning so that you're able to get to organize yourselves, so that you're able to get things started in your centers as well. Of course, we're also assuming that many of you have equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives going on in your centers, but we also want to very humbly inspire others who want to get started. So our vision is rather simple. It looks simple, although in practice, it takes a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of planning to flesh out our core values, our core EDI values in everything that we do in our school, starting with materials design, but going through lesson planning, course design, and teacher training. Teacher training is such an important part of this initiative because we believe that it's not enough to hand out materials to teachers, to your peers, and say, here, we've planned something, you go do it, you go run it. That's not enough. It's important to create a strategy where we also demonstrate how we've intended the material to be used, or at the very least, create a space where we can talk, where you can talk to your peers about how specific materials can be used. A lot of your peers, a lot of colleagues will say, look, I just don't know how to do this. So there has to be a space where everybody talks about possible applications and possible ways of implementing materials. And of course, it's really important that the initiative, in our case, started from us, from teachers. We believe in management-led initiatives, but we want to convey that we don't have to wait for a top-down approach to get things started. You do it yourselves, and you are the ones teaching in the classroom, and you know your learners' characteristics and needs, right? So our mission is to create a strategy that goes beyond the creation of materials, but also creates a culture where teachers feel encouraged to talk about all the different aspects, the priority areas that Eduardo mentioned before. And finally, we also want to not only talk about the priority areas that we showed you before, but we want to create a safe space for our learners to feel valued and respected, and for them to understand the importance, to become aware of the importance of difference and diversity in their classrooms, in their cities, in their countries, and the world at large. Finally, I'm just going to say that we decided to start this initiative here in Hong Kong because we felt that there was no unified approach in our center, in our different life stages, our different teaching products. There was no unified conversation around how to create materials. So that's why we started talking about what we could do and how we could do it for, at the beginning, early years, kindergarten, and later primary. And here we are, in case you're thinking of how this looks in practice. We've included some objectives and key results that you can, of course, copy, or you can get inspiration from. Our main objective is to create materials, yes, and to create a bank from which teachers can get resources ready to use. But the key results that we want to achieve were to, be able to develop a strategy to keep those materials coming from, for which we need to get other people involved. It can't be just the three of us. We have to get as many people participating in the project as possible. So we need to get buy-in from others. As I said before, we need to get that grassroots movement going on. All right, now my colleague James will tell you a little bit about materials, a little bit about this, the specific criteria that we follow to start developing them.
All right, yes, hello everyone. My name is James Sample, and yes, I'm gonna talk to you about the materials, these materials that we've mentioned, the ones that we have created, the EDI materials. And so, right, Eduardo mentioned earlier that this project started with early years, but the bulk of our materials have come from primary. That's where most of the work has been created, in primary. But as you can see here, here's the work scheme of the different life stages. So what happened was, it started with us trying to align the it started with 6 priority areas. Just to remind you: race, ethnicity, and culture, gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, religion, and belief. It's expanded since. That's a good thing, but it did start with those 6. And so we tried to align those with the teaching materials that already exist, that we use at the British Council. And so I'm going to talk to you mostly about primary. 1, as I said, because that's the bulk, and 2, it's what I specialize in as well. So let's have a look at primary then. So primary goes from 6 years of age to 12 here in Hong Kong, pretty much the same around the world, right? But here it's those specifically. So we use magazines in primary, and each magazine runs for 6 weeks, and it's based around a theme, a topic, an overarching, there'll be a question basically that they have to answer throughout, in various ways, and there'll be a project at the end. So Yummy is primary 1. And the question is, what do we eat and drink? And so we thought we would connect race, ethnicity, and culture to this one. And so we looked at breakfasts from around the world. We looked at breakfasts from Turkey, and we got to look at, people from Turkey and what they eat for breakfast. And it wasn't just Turkey, we went to the Philippines, I think 6 in total. And at the end, they had to design their own breakfast, what they found from the different countries that they thought was delicious, and primary 2 over there, you will see special days. The question is, how do we celebrate festivals? And the priority is religion and belief. So as you can see here, Kwanzaa is one of those that we put on display for them to have a look and get into groups, watch the video, find out all about Kwanzaa. As I say, these are not part of the British Council materials. This is what we added, right? I think they have, maybe Chinese New Year, which makes sense, right? It makes sense for Hong Kong. Be prepared, primary 3. This one was, the question was, what should I do in an emergency? So we linked disability to this one, and we thought, you know, we would make it all about empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and imagine, well, asking them first of all, what would you do in this situation? And then asking you, well, what would someone else do who is a wheelchair user, for example? And we thought about the British Council, like, look around you. How would your classmate who happened to be in a wheelchair evacuate if we all had to evacuate, you know? And just making them aware of the different situations, right, that we could be in a classroom. Primary 4, they're inspiring lives. The question is, what can we learn about inspirational figures? And we thought, age, okay, who's inspirational here? Grandparents, you know, older people in the family. And there is a, you know, there is a stereotype around age where you can ask primary 4s, what do your grandparents do? Nothing, you know, sit around, do nothing. And we wanted to actually give them a questionnaire to go and interview someone older in their family, much older, and get them to relive their past, you know, realize that we weren't so different, you know, we're not so different. Actually, we have a lot of things in common, and just to be inspired by their grandparents. Primary 5, a personal favorite of mine. We link gender to this magazine. The question is, what was the greatest thing ever invented? Now, usually we go to the white, cisgendered inventors, right? And sure, great, they invented a lot. But the point here was to highlight all of the female inventors. And so we had these cards here. I like to call them like versions of Pokemon cards, you know, where they would have these incredible women, and they had to match them with what they invented, what they're famous for. And then they had to sort of rank their inventions as well in order of convenience and usefulness, and how it's affected them personally as well. And finally, sexual orientation was one of the magazines of primary 6, because we have 6 throughout the year, by the way. So this is just one of the examples for 1 year. Film time. The question is, how do filmmakers show emotions in their films? And so we showed them a Pixar short called Out. And basically they had to get into groups and think about the sequel. They had to develop a sequel to this film, and with great results. So basically, all of the magazines throughout the year of primary will have a different priority area. So all of them will be exposed to all the different areas throughout the year. That's for primary. But as Eduardo says, it starts early years. Eduardo already mentioned some of it. Our early years starts from 12 months all the way to 6 years. This was different. We don't have magazines in early years. Instead, it's divided into like topics, basically. And we wanted to get books that complemented those topics and develop activities around them. So we got families here, about sexual orientation, drawn together about age, and from the stars in the sky to the fish in the sea, about gender identity. And then finally, very quickly, secondary, something I'm not too familiar with. I did not create this one. Actually, it was a colleague. The 3 of us created these, but another colleague helped us with this one. And this is about, it's a familiarization task as an introduction to those prior EDI areas that we've mentioned. Because in secondary, they can, of course, talk about these topics more. It's not so much about exposure. They can go deeper, right, with this. And so it's to raise awareness, open up conversations about the topics, and even giving vocabulary, just simply providing the vocabulary for them to talk about it. Because we found out that they're very aware of the concepts, even in primary early years, but maybe they just need the vocabulary. So those are some of the activities that we just wanted to highlight today. And just to wrap things up, I'm going to pass you back over to Victor, and he'll have some final words for you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. So yeah, we're moving on to the final part of our presentation, of our talk. We can see that there are some questions already, so looking forward to discussing a little bit at the end. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've tried to gain some buy-in, some engagement from our peers, from our colleagues. And we've devised quite a few ways so far. Feel free though to share how you've done it in the chat box if you have, and feel free to also comment on what we're gonna be telling you. So ways of marketing EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion internally. It is important to foster engagement internally because we want our peers, our colleagues to participate in the initiative. So it's not just about getting parents and students engaged. We need to also get our peers to work along, to work with us in this. So one very effective way of getting people to sort of see that it is possible to embed equality, diversity, and inclusion in very practical terms in our classroom activities is to show how you go about planning these lessons. Show your lesson framework, show your process. Something that we've done, something that James and Eduardo have done is run sessions where they talk about the tasks and about the task cycle. And James has in particular run sessions with the primary team, with primary teachers to demonstrate how some of the activities work. And that has enabled teachers, that has empowered teachers to, ask questions, get ideas from their peers on possible adaptations and possible ways of implementing the tasks with different groups. That is really important because that creates a community of practice, which is something that we're aiming for. It's important to also bring people together to actually create activities and lesson procedures together. It's not just about showing them an activity and some materials and say, here you are, what do you think about it? It's also about setting up your working group and working together. Call your peers and say, look, we have this topic. This is what the syllabus says. What can we tackle? What area of diversity can we tackle? What area of inclusion can we discuss with our learners depending on their characteristics, on their age group? Something else is have a look at the syllabus. We are aware that in many schools, in many teaching centers, syllabus restrictions are very strict, and many of your directors of studies might tell you, look, you cannot deviate from what we give you, from the curriculum. But we're here to say that there are ways to embed equality, diversity, and inclusion strands. There are ways of fulfilling, of achieving the objectives of your course while also fostering a conversation around EDI. It is very possible. It's also important to share whatever continuous professional development materials and courses you find, because we all need to learn more. And this is something I was gonna say later on, but let me just say it before I forget. You don't need to have all the answers. Some of your peers and yourself might at some point feel that you don't really know how to answer a question. Sometimes students might come up with a question that you're very unsure of how to tackle, how to answer. It's okay to go back to the staff room, ask around, check the internet, check the literature, ask your director of studies. It is okay to tell your students at any age, I have to think a little bit more about this and I'll get back to you. So feel free to take your time if anything like that comes up. We know that discrimination and things like racism, they have to be tackled immediately. But if a question comes up and you don't know an answer readily, you can take your time to find that answer or to come up with a suitable answer. Just in case you're wondering, I cannot see the questions yet, but I wonder if one of those questions is around that area. So it is important as well, if you're getting your peers together to talk about how to go about this, it's important to check if your school already has policies in place. Because if it does, then your working group, your special interest group, will have to align to the wider aims of the school or the organization. As we've said a few times already, our organization has a clear EDI agenda, and what we're doing is fleshing out what the agenda sets out to achieve at a very practical classroom level. But if that does not exist, well, it's time to take action in your school. And as I said previously, it's time to, reach out to your peers and reach out to your director of studies, or your group, your team of teachers. It's also important to talk about the materials, the activities that you implemented, that you ran in your lessons, so that you can foster that environment, that culture of feedback, constant feedback, and learning from experience, learning from what you do, and even a culture of action research. Encourage your team members to give you feedback on materials that you create. If others create materials, give them feedback, actually get to use, implement the activities that they design. Something that I'm not sure we've mentioned is that most of the materials that we've designed, most of the activities that we've created, do not take over whole sessions. They don't take over the lesson, in the sense that they're not supposed to replace what's already there. These lessons, these activities are not a substitute to the syllabus, to the curriculum. These activities complement the curriculum. And I think that's really, really important, because a lot of administrators and a lot of our colleagues have said, wait a minute, but I don't have time to teach. I don't have time to cover my content. How can I cover something that's extra? This is not extra. Equality, diversity, and inclusion are strands of life. And there are ways of addressing this content, of talking about diversity and inclusion, as you talk about language points, as you address language systems. And that's really, really important. This should not replace your syllabus, because it might not even be possible, but it is very possible to supplement and complement. One way of fostering engagement is also to remind teachers that they can use this as part of their professional development. And we decided to show you our learning aim for the year, our learning objective. This allows us as teachers in our school to have a clear goal for the academic year. And one of our clear goals is to do this work. And in creating these materials and in getting our colleagues to help out, we are achieving part of our performance, and we show how we are committed to the development of our students and our peers and ourselves. So you can you feel free to copy our aim, our development aim for the future. So we're looking into what's coming in year 3 of our project. And of course, we want all our products, all our life stages to have materials and activities and lesson plans from where teachers can draw, from where teachers can get inspiration. But we ultimately want EDI initiatives in all our centers. In the case of the British Council, that has a network of schools, of teaching centers around the world. But we also want other departments of our schools to be engaged in our initiatives as well. Finally, I have to remind you, I have to tell you, and I have to invite you to get the conversation started and start talking about the ways of bringing all these ideas, all these principles into practice in your school. Ask yourself, is it happening? How can we do even more? Is this not happening? How can we get it started? How can I organize my colleagues to start creating materials? How can I get my managers involved? Because these are really, really important conversations to be having at this point. We leave you our emails. We leave our emails there in case you have more questions, and in case you'd like to send us a message, or in case you want to tell us about your experience. I thank you all for coming, and I believe we now have some time for questions.
We do have some time for questions. Not so much time, but there's some time there. I can see it in the chat and throughout. Everyone's found this really inspiring. You know, people are saying that it is such an important topic. So well done to you three. I just had a very quick question. This also came up in the Q&A box. But can I ask, what has been the reaction from parents, students, and colleagues?
I would say, honestly, to be honest, yes, overall, very positive. Yes, if we talk about them separately, parents, it's important for them to know what's happening, right? So with primary, they know from the get-go, the parents, because it's part of the marketing. We do advertise what's going on, and so there's been no negative feedback from parents at all. We have more interaction with early years because we tell them what's happening every lesson, and so they're always nodding along. They can ask questions at the end if they don't understand, but again, it's always positive. Sometimes some tricky situations have come up in the classroom where maybe a child has said something insensitive, or maybe something that they just don't understand, that they've said the wrong way. But as Victor mentioned earlier, maybe that could take us off guard and we might not know the answer, right? But it's important that we just take a moment to assess the situation and maybe revisit it later. But it's important to address it once we know how to.
Colleagues have also been very supportive. I think, like Victor was mentioning before, a lot of the times, like maybe they're hesitant a little bit just because they think like the activities are going to take over the lesson. But once we've ran the trainings and we've told them like, look, it's embedded also into our language aims. So it's not like, oh, it's the time for like an EDI moment of the week, and that's completely separate from the rest. There's stop learning about this part of the language and then just focus on this. No, it's all, the idea is for it to feel cohesive and natural. So once we've ran the sessions, the training sessions for our teachers, they've been more on board. And now it's actually, like Victor said, part of our aims. So everyone is expected to do it. Yeah.